Today I want to show you how to write a simple indicator that adds support and resistance lines to your chart. Support and resistance is a subjective thing, so I'm going to base this on the ZigZag indicator, which should have already been supplied with your copy of MetaTrader, whether it's MetaTrader 4 or 5. They both include the ZigZag indicator. I already have a chart open here. I'll just add the ZigZag indicator so you can see what I'm talking about. Alright, so now I've added the ZigZag indicator with the default inputs. And you can see it plots between peaks, high and low peaks, and then simply draws a line in between them. What I want to do is use those peaks to identify the support and resistance lines. And I'll just load up the indicator that I'm going to create today. Now I've added the indicator, but I will just shrink this a little bit so you can see a little bit more definition there. And you can see it's picked out points where there is a grouping of peaks, either high or some low peaks here, based on matching up with points in the past. And of course the settings for this can be adjusted in the inputs, and I'll show you how to write this indicator now. I'm starting in the MetaTrader 5 editor. I've already created the outline of this using the wizard, and the first things I'm going to be inserting will be the input statements, and these are common between MT4 and MT5, but I'll do it here in MT5 first. So first I want the inputs to the ZigZag indicator itself, and these are exactly the same three inputs that the ZigZag indicator takes. So there's a depth, deviation, and a backstep. Next, I want the inputs that I'm going to be using here to analyze those zigzag points and find the peaks and identify when they form a level. So first, input gap points. I'm saying that if two peaks are within, in this case, 100 points of each other, then they are not distinct peaks and they are part of a level. So I'm using this to determine when points or peaks on the zigzag are close enough together to be considered part of the same level. And next, sensitivity. I don't necessarily want to place a level every time there is a peak. Sometimes a peak is just a random peak. So what I'm saying is there must be at least, in this case, two peaks at the same level to form a level. And if there's just one that's on its own, then I'll simply ignore that. And finally, the look back. I don't want to look at all of the peaks in the ZigZag indicator. As you can imagine, over time, the more and more peaks you get, the more crowded the total price range becomes, and you'll just start to get lots and lots of levels. So by limiting this, I'm only looking at the most recent, and there's less chance that it's becoming crowded with just random peaks that might happen to be at the same level and form a level. So I'm saying I'm going to look back through the 50 most recent peaks, not looking for 50 levels, 50 peaks, and see how many levels they create. And then for the actual drawing of the horizontal lines, these are drawn as objects on the screen, and objects on screen all have names. So I want them all to have a common prefix, and that way I can identify the horizontal lines that have been drawn by this indicator. So I'm just setting the default prefix here to SR level underscore. And all of these horizontal lines will be named SR level underscore and then a number. And finally, I want to be able to set a color for those lines. I'm defaulting the color to yellow, although in the demonstration earlier I had changed that to black. And then a line weighting is just setting the width of the line. I'm just setting this to 2. Now for the levels, I need a place where I can store the prices where those levels are being set. And I'm just declaring an array here of type double that I'm calling SR levels. And now for MT5 only, the indicators in MT5 are a little different to MT4. And in MetaTrader 5, you need to set up a handle to an indicator, and then you get the values from that indicator back into a buffer array. So I'll just declare those two as global variables here. So first the buffer, and this is for the ZigZag indicator, not for these horizontal lines for the support and resistance. So this is getting the values from the ZigZag indicator. And then the handle. Now, all of these inputs and declaring this SR levels double, they are the same in MT4, and we'll go to that in a moment and fill that in. And these two lines are the only two unique lines so far for MT5. But while I'm in the MT5 editor, I will just fill in some statements in the on init because there's also a difference here. First, I need to initialize the ZigZag indicator. So I create a handle to that indicator using the iCustom function. So this is the handle that I declared here. I'm calling iCustom. First two arguments to iCustom are the symbol and the period, and I'm getting these from the current chart symbol and period. And then the path to find the custom indicator. In MetaTrader 5, in at least my installation, it's been installed in examples ZigZag. If I go to indicators here and examples, and you can see ZigZag here under examples ZigZag. You might want to check that it's in the same place on your installation, because if it's not, then that won't work and you'll need to change the path name. I've also used a double backslash here because a backslash is a special character and the double backslash converts to a single backslash. So for my MetaTrader 5, the ZigZag indicator is in examples ZigZag. The next three arguments here are just the three inputs to the ZigZag indicator in the same order that you would send them to the ZigZag indicator. And that's everything for initializing the handle to that indicator. Now I just need to make sure that that was successful and I don't have an invalid handle. So I check if the handle is invalid, then I'm just going to print a message, and that will go to the log, and then I return init failed, which will terminate the indicator. And then I want to have this buffer that I've declared, that's where I'll be gathering the values from the indicator. I want to have that appear in the same sequence as the bars on screen. And on screen, bar number 0 is the latest bar or the last bar. So by using array set as series, I set the buffer so that element number 0 corresponds with bar number 0 on the chart. So array set as series, buffer true. And then just in case there was an earlier run of this indicator and it left some lines on screen and didn't get a chance to clean them up, I'm just going to clean up before I begin here using the objects delete all function. The arguments here are the chart number, and chart 0 is the current chart, the input prefix from above, the subchart, and subchart 0 is the main chart, and the type of object I'm deleting, obj_h line, are horizontal lines. So what this will do is find all horizontal lines on the chart where the name begins with this prefix, and it will just delete them all in one go. After that, I'm just going to call chart redraw on chart number 0 just to refresh the chart in case it didn't redraw for some reason. And finally, one time I'm going to resize this SR levels. So here's the levels array where I'm going to be holding the values in the levels. I know that I can't possibly have more levels than the look back, because that's the maximum I can get, and I should have less because I'm looking for multiple points to be at the same level. But just in case I've set the, in case I've set this sensitivity to 1, it is possible that I will have as many levels as I find points. So I'm just going to resize this level one time to be the size of the look back, and that means I've got enough places in that to hold all of the levels I might find. Now, one last thing before we go to MetaTrader 4 is in the on init. Now, the wizard may not have created the on init for you, so I'll just delete this. All you need to do to create it is begin typing OND, and you see the autocompletes come up. If I just press enter, and if you look carefully, you can see that the cursor has changed and has a small arrow next to it. So now if I just press tab, that will fill in the rest of the signature for this function. So because we're in MetaTrader 5 and I've created that ZigZag indicator and I have a handle to that, I need to release that. And that's the indicator release statement, passing in the handle. And then also I'm calling objects delete all again here because I'm removing the indicator. I'm just getting rid of all the levels that it might have created on screen. Doing a chart redraw, and that's the end of the on init section. So now I'm going to go back to MetaTrader 4 and do all of that, and you'll see the only difference is that I haven't inserted those extra lines that were from MetaTrader 5 so far. All right, in MetaTrader 4 here, so ZigZag inputs, so everything in the initialization section is the same for MetaTrader 4 as well. And you can see here the only thing I've left, I haven't set up the handle or the buffer to the ZigZag because we don't need those for MetaTrader 4. And in the on init section for MetaTrader 4, just as before, I clean up the levels that might have been left from an earlier run. by deleting all of the objects that begin with that prefix name, forcing a chart redraw, and then I one time set the size of the SR levels array to be this lookback. And in the MetaTrader 4 on DNet section, I also want to delete any of the levels that are left on screen. So objects delete all and chart redraw, and those are the only things I need in the DNet section on MetaTrader 4. And now, still in the MetaTrader 4 editor, I moved into the on calculate section. First, I entered a level gap as a number of points, but I want that to be in a price. So I'm just going to convert that gap in points to price, and that's as easy as taking the input gap points and multiplying that by the result of symbol info double, passing in the current chart symbol, and this symbol underscore point constant. And that will give me the size of a single point for this symbol. And if I just multiply that by the number of points, then I get the price size of that gap that I'm setting. Now, I only want to process this on a new bar. The levels will only change on a new bar, or they should only change on a new bar. In a lot of cases, they won't change at all, but it is possible, because the ZigZag indicator repaints, that one or two of those levels may change, in particular because I'm looking for points aligning and matching up. So I may find that I now have some points that aligned that didn't happen before when the ZigZag indicator repaints. So on each new bar is when I'm going to go through this loop. And to do that, all I have to do is check the rates total and the prev calculated. They're both passed in as arguments here. Prev calculated tells me how many total bars I have seen on the last run through here. It actually tells me the number that I returned and said that I had seen. And rates total tells me how many total bars are available. So if a new bar has been created, then I've got one extra rates total, and prev calculated should be one less. If the two of them are the same, rates total is equal to prev calculated, then it means nothing has changed or no new bars have been created since the last time I called this function. So if nothing has changed, then rates total is equal to prev calculated, and I just return rates total, which means that will stay in prev calculated, and this will just loop through each time it's called until a new bar is created. Now I want to find all of those peaks from the ZigZag indicator, counting backwards from the most recent bar until I get as many peaks as I've specified, or until I reach the end of my bars. So I'm declaring some variables here. The ZZ variable, type double, will hold the price level where each of those peaks occurs. ZZ peaks is the array where I'm going to store the peaks that I find. And ZZ count is just where I'm counting as I go through and find peaks. I'm just going to be incrementing that. So then I'm resizing this ZZ peaks again to be the size of imp lookback. This is the maximum number of peaks that I can find. So I'm just doing a one-time resize to make sure there's enough space in there to hold the values I find. And I'm initializing it with zeros. Just in case I don't find as many peaks as imp lookback, I need a way to know that there are elements in there that haven't been found, and a price of 0 is really an invalid price. So I'm initializing ZZ peaks to 0. So now I'm going to loop through using the indicator. I'm going to loop through until I find as many peaks as I need, and that's beginning with int I equals 1, because I'm not looking at bar number 0. I'm going to start with bar number 1. As long as I is less than rates total, so if I up to the maximum number of bars that are available, and ZZ count is less than the lookback. So as long as I still have bars and I haven't reached my specified lookback number, then I just increment I with I++. So first I get the value. And this is different for MetaTrader 4 and MetaTrader 5, and we'll switch to MetaTrader 5 soon, and you'll see the difference there. But for MetaTrader 4, I also call the iCustom function, but it's a different iCustom function to MetaTrader 5. In MetaTrader 4, this gives back a value rather than setting up a handle. So the value I want, the ZZ value, I'm calling iCustom. The initial arguments are the same, the symbol and the period, the path to the indicator, and in my installation of MetaTrader 4, the ZigZag indicator is not under examples, it's directly under indicators. So you might also want to check to see that the path is correct if you're using MetaTrader 4. The same inputs though, depth, deviation, and backstep. But then the next two arguments are the buffer number that I want to get back from that indicator. And there is only one buffer that has values for the ZigZag indicator, that's buffer number 0. and I want element number I. So I'm getting the ith bar back from the I custom indicator. And next, the ZigZag indicator doesn't store values for every place or for every bar. It only stores values at the peaks, and in between those the values are either 0 or an empty value. So I'm only looking for the peaks. So I'm doing a quick test here. If ZZ is not equal to 0 and it's not an empty value, then it means I've actually found a peak value. And when I find a peak, I simply assign that value to the ZZ peaks array in the position ZZ count. And then I increment ZZ count so I'm ready to catch the next value. And that's the end of the loop where I'm catching the values from the peaks of the ZigZag indicator, but they are, as you can imagine, some highs and some lows. I want to get them in order. So all I'm doing there is using the array sort function, passing in ZZ peaks. Now some of these are going to be 0 values, but I'll eliminate those in the next step where I'm going through the array. But this will put them all in order, and that makes it easier for me to find where peaks have aligned. Now I've changed to MetaTrader 5. A lot is very similar here, but there are just a couple of differences where I'm getting the values from the ZigZag indicator. So the one-time conversion of points to a price gap, this is the same code using this symbol info double to get the size of a point. Again, only processing on a new bar, so if rates total is equal to prev calculated, return rates total, and that will loop around. Setting up the same values, ZZ, ZZ peaks, ZZ count, and I'm also resizing the ZZ peaks array and initializing that to zeros. But now this is the first point of difference, because in MetaTrader 5 the indicators are set up with handles. All I need to do to get the values is to use this copy buffer function, and I'm passing in the handle and the buffer number that I want the values for, the start position to get the values, and the number that I want. And I'm simply getting everything. So I'm starting at position 0 for rates total. So I'm getting everything that should be available. And the last argument is the buffer where these values are going to be stored. So this statement will find that indicator handle, buffer number 0, and remember in MetaTrader 4 you pass the buffer number in the iCustom function. In MetaTrader 5 you pass that in here. There is only one buffer on the ZigZag indicator, and it's buffer number 0. From position 0 for the total number of values, and position 0 is the most recent value in the indicator. So I'm counting from right to left, 0 all the way to the end, copying those into buffer. And this count variable then holds the number of values that were returned by that copy buffer. And if that doesn't work for some reason, and it's possible because I might call this quickly after setting up the handle and there hasn't been enough time for that information to gather into the indicator, then count will return a negative number. So if count is less than 0, that means I've had a problem. I'm capturing the error here using the getLastError function. I'm not going to do anything with it here though, but I'm just capturing it. And then return 0. Now, normally from these functions you return rates total. By returning 0, next time this function is called, prev calculated will be 0, which means that in this test, rates total is the total number of bars available, prev calculated is 0, so it won't return. So this is effectively forcing it to come back in here and try again by returning 0 at that point. And then this loop is the same. I'm going from I equals 1, bar number 1, up to rates total or imp loop back, whichever comes first. And now here, ZZ equals buffer I. Because I've already copied all the information into the buffer, all I need to do to get that into the ZZ value is pull out the element from the buffer array. So ZZI. After that, the test is the same though. ZZ is still going to be 0 or an empty value if I'm in between peaks. And if I'm not in between peaks, then I'm simply assigning that value to the array, incrementing the counter, and at the end, I sort the ZZ peaks array. So that's all same between MetaTrader 4 and 5. So remember here, the only differences were the use of the copy buffer to get the values from the indicator. I'm testing the number of values that came back in case there's been a problem, and forcing a retry by returning effectively rates total equals 0 here, which comes back in the prev calculated next time, and then just pulling the element from the buffer rather than calling another function to get that element. Now I'm going to stay in the MetaTrader 5 editor here, but this piece of code is the same for MetaTrader 4 and 5. In fact, all the rest of the code is the same for MetaTrader 4 and 5. So I need to search for groupings in these peaks. Remember, I'm only calling it a level if I have enough peaks within a defined range. So I'm initializing some variables first. The SR counter is the number of support resistance levels I've found so far. Price is what I'm using to determine where that price level is, and it's going to be an average. If I've got a number of peaks within a certain range, then this price will be the average of those peaks. And price count, how many of those peaks I found, because remember, I'm looking for a certain number to be there before I consider it to be a level, and then I'll also use this in calculating that average price. And then I'm initializing SR levels to 0. Remember, I sized this at the beginning of the program to be the maximum number of peaks that I could find, but I expect that there will be less levels than that because I'm looking for peaks to align. So I'm just initializing this to 0, and any levels that have a 0 value at the end of this loop will be invalid levels. So then, simple counter for I equals imp loopback minus 1, as long as I is greater than or equal to 0, and I minus minus. So I'm counting down, and I'm going to be counting down through the ZZ peaks array from top to bottom. So first I add the current value of ZZ peaks to the price. Now price started at 0, so the first element that I find is just going to be setting it to price, but I'm accumulating it here because I do want to get the average price. And of course then I increment the price count by 1, price count plus plus. And now I want to know if I've found a place where the grouping has ended, or if I've reached the bottom of that array. So the first check here, if I equals 0, means that I'm down at the last element of the ZZ peaks array, and so that must be the end of a grouping. The next part here says if ZZ peaks I minus ZZ peaks I minus 1, so I'm looking at I at the moment, and if the price for the next element in that array is far enough away that the difference is greater than the level gap, then it means that that would be a new level, or it may or may not be a new level, but it's certainly not part of this level because it's too far away. Now it's important that I make this test happen first. When these are evaluated, because I'm using an OR statement here, as soon as this statement becomes true, no more parts of this are evaluated. So if I is equal to 0, then this part is true, and this is not going to be evaluated. And that's important because if I is 0, then there is no ZZ peaks I minus 1, and I would get an array out of bounds. But because this is evaluated to true, this is not evaluated at all, and I don't get the array out of bounds error. If I reverse this, then when I reaches 0, even though this is true, it would happen later, and this would be evaluated first, and we get an error. So what I've done there is say, if I've run out of elements to inspect, or if the next element is too far away to be part of this level. And now I'm checking this price count. Remember I said it has to be sensitivity. So if I happen to have found one random point and there's nothing else near it, and I'm looking at a sensitivity of 2, then I'll be saying here price count only made it to 1, and that's not good enough to be a level. So price count must be greater than or equal to the sensitivity. And then I calculate that average price, so price divided by price count. And here, I haven't checked it earlier, but if you did put sensitivity as 0, then you could get a divide by 0 error. You should work that out fairly quickly. Sensitivity should be at least 1. And then I simply assign that average price to the SR levels array at the position SR counter, which has been initialized to 0 on the first time through. and then I increment SR counter plus plus. And then I reset price to 0 and price count to 0. Now, this will also find level 0. If you look back here, ZZ counts may contain zeros. ZZ peaks may contain zeros. I'm sorting them. This will count down and will find those zeros. I'm trusting that 0 is so far away from any real price that it's not going to be found. And even if it is, it will be adding nothing to price when I accumulate it. So it's not going to be a problem even if I create a level, because it will be created at 0 price, which gets picked up later. So yes, after I found a level, reset price to 0, reset price count to 0, and then it can carry on. And then I'm calling a custom function draw levels. So let's go down and look at draw levels function now. And I'm still in the MetaTrader 5 editor because so far none of this has changed and nothing else is going to be different with MetaTrader 4. So the draw levels function, and now I'm going to loop through for int I equals 0 as long as I is less than the lookback number. So this is the total number of elements in the SR levels array. And then I'm just setting up this name, which is the name of the objects that I'm going to be creating. And that is just the prefix that we entered plus integer to string of the level number. And then a quick check here. If the level I've found is 0, which means that effectively there is no level. So when I was calculating the levels earlier, I reset them to 0, and then I filled in levels as I found them, which means there are going to be some in the array that are still 0. So if the levels is 0, then I'm going to delete that line from the screen. It may not exist, but that won't cause a problem. So if I call object delete and there is no line with that name, that will just fall through. But this will get rid of a line if, say, level 10 is no longer needed because the ZigZag has moved and I no longer have 10 levels, then this will at least delete that from screen for me. And that continue statement then will bring me back to the beginning of this loop again to look at the next element. So if we pass through this, if we hit the continue statement, it will go straight back to the beginning of the loop. If not, then it will come down here and I'll attempt to find that object on screen. So I'm saying for this level, is there already a horizontal line with that name? So if the object find function, which you pass in the chart number and the name of the object you're searching, if that returns a negative number, then it means that the object was not found on screen. Otherwise, it will return the chart where the object is found. So I'm saying here, if that's not found, then I'm going to create it. And this is the object create statement, chart number 0, the name of the object I'm creating, the type, which is a horizontal line, the subchart, and the time where this is going to be placed. Now, this is a common function that's used for a lot of objects, and most objects have a time and a price. Horizontal lines go all the way across the screen, so they don't have a time, so I'm just passing in time 0. And then, of course, SR levels I is the price, which does set the position on screen for the horizontal line. I also want to set the color using the object set integer. Again, chart number 0, name of the object, obj_prop underscore color, and this is the line color that was input. Also, object set integer, same arguments, but this time obj_prop underscore width, and I'm setting the line weight that we entered. So this is what makes it 2 points. This is what makes the line 2 wide instead of 1 by default. And then finally, object set integer 0 name obj_prop underscore selectable, and I'm setting that to true. If you right click on a chart and go view objects, only the selectable objects appear in that list. You can, there's a checkbox where you can say show all, but I'm just setting obj_prop selectable to make sure that these lines all appear in that, just to avoid confusion. So that will create the horizontal line on screen if it hasn't already been found, or if it didn't already exist. If it does already exist, all I need to do is move it to the new price level. Maybe the price is the same, and that won't hurt if I'm resetting the price, but just in case it's different, all I do is object set double, chart number 0, name of the object, I'm setting the price, and I'm setting that to SR levels I, and that will just change the price and move the line up or down. And finally, chart redraw on chart number 0 will just force a refresh so that all those line movements or new lines are seen. And that's it. I'll go over to MetaTrader 4 and do the same thing. So now in MetaTrader 4, I've done the same searching for groupings and set levels. This code is identical to the MetaTrader 5 code. Calling draw levels again, here's the draw levels function, and this is also identical to the MetaTrader 5 code. So let me just compile, make sure I haven't made any typing errors as I go through. So that's compiled for MetaTrader 4, and that's compiled for MetaTrader 5. And you saw the example at the beginning. I'll just bring that up again. So this is using a look back of 50, and you can see that it's finding lines that are grouped together. But here's a peak, for example, and I'll zoom in the editor, where I haven't drawn a support and resistance because there is no other peak within the 50 look back that is within 100 points of that point there. So you can see it's trying to find points that make sense rather than just every point that the ZigZag indicator throws up. I hope this has been useful to you. This is just one approach to finding support and resistance lines on the chart. As I said, it's a very subjective thing normally, but this is a fairly simple one using the ZigZag indicator, which you already have with your MetaTrader installation. So I hope this has been useful to you. If it has, click the like button. Please click the like button. And if you want to see more of our videos, then click subscribe, and then if you click the bell icon, you'll actually be notified when we release new videos. So until the next time, thank you for watching.